Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Barth, the director of the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. And first off, happy Constitution Day. Today is the 238th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution by the founders, sending it out to the states for ratification. And our education team at the library has been busy this week doing virtual programs on the Constitution for schools across Arkansas and the country. And as some of you know, today is also known as Citizenship Day and serves to honor all of those who have become U.S. citizens, whether native-born or through the naturalization process. And so I think it's important for us to note that on the front end as we talk about some activities and events that are very important to the citizens of the United States. Welcome to another Clinton Presidential Center Presents event, and as always, the Clinton Presidential Center events are co-sponsored by the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Presidential Library, and the Clinton School of Public Service. I hope that most of you have seen our temporary exhibit, Portraits from a Presidency, which combines an array of portraits of the Clinton family members. Some are pieces by prominent artists such as Faith Ringgold and Chuck Close. Some are pieces by unknown artists who sent portraits to the White House as a gift to the first family. And two of the portraits are of particular relevance to tonight's conversation, the official White House portraits of President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, both painted by Simi Knox, the first Black American artist to receive a presidential portrait commission. Joining us for this conversation about the art of the White House is Stewart McLaurin. Stewart serves as president of the White House Historical Association, a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization founded by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy in 1961 to share and to preserve the rich history of the White House. The association works every day to fulfill Mrs. Kennedy's vision through its mission of enhancing the understanding, appreciation, and enjoyment of the executive mansion. In his 11 years as president of the association's cultural and educational the association's cultural and educational program has been expanded in varied ways with an eye to ensuring that White House history will be preserved for future generations. In September of last year, the White House Historical Association opened a cutting-edge, technology-based education center, the People's House, a White House experience, to further promote the story of the executive mansion, those who live there, and the people who have dedicated their careers to White House service. The People's House was conceptualized and executed in an impressive 20 months. And amazingly quick for
Yes.
the creation of a museum. Stephanie and I got to see the People's House exhibit just a few days before it opened, and I know we were both impressed by its style, its accessibility, and its excellent use of technology. Stewart is also the host of the White House 1600 Sessions, the association's official podcast, and he writes a monthly column for USA Today about the history of the White House and our nation's presidents and first ladies. Facilitating the conversation with Stewart about the work of the association and the art of the White House is my colleague and friend Stephanie Street, the executive director of the Clinton Foundation. Now take it away, Stephanie and Stewart. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Jay. Let me just say what a privilege it's been to work with you for the last 3 years. Jay recently announced that he was going to be moving on for some other opportunities, but I just want to say publicly what an incredible thought partner you've been, just a wonderful colleague who brings so much experience to the table and have really added just a whole new spirit to what the programming we do here is for students, for the community, and really focusing on civic engagement, which in today's world is something I think we all need to have a big focus on. So you will be missed, but we are excited to stay connected with you. And I also want to recognize some of the other folks in the room here who make programs like this possible. First, let me give a shout out to our Clinton Center members and our donors. Their support is what allows us to present these types of programs. And their support also is what is going to allow us to work on this expansion that we've shared little snippets about over the past year or so. So big shout out to our donors and our supporters and our members. I also want to thank Jay's team at the National Archives, our incredible partners on the staff. I see Kathleen here and others, and again, your partnership is vital as well for us to be able to deliver the quality educational programming and other public programs. And my colleagues at the Clinton Foundation, I think I have like the best job around. I just kind of turn the lights on, keep the trains running, and the wonderful people here who actually do the work every day. I'm really blessed to have you as colleagues. And of course, our wonderful Clinton Center volunteers. I know, Stewart, you know from your work how important it is for volunteers. They literally, they're gonna laugh because I say this every time, but it's true. We literally couldn't open the door on any day without the help of our volunteers. They provide such incredible service and hospitality. And that's one of the things that we're known for. When President Clinton travels around, he says it never fails that he is approached by someone who tells them what just a wonderful experience they had here at the Clinton Center, which begins when they walk in the door being greeted by our wonderful volunteers. So huge thanks to everyone. All right, with that out of the way, Stewart, I would just like to ask you to give us a little bit about your background. You've had a fascinating career. I'd love for you to share a little bit with the audience about what you've done through your sort of career in public service and how you ended up at the White House Historic Association.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. It's wonderful to be here and to enjoy this exciting evening with you. I'm excited and embarrassed to say that this is my first visit here to the Clinton Library, and it's one that is way overdue, and I'm honored to be here with you this evening. I have received calls in advance from both Mac McClarty and French Hill, who wanted to be here this evening and asked me to extend their best to everyone, but both are just extraordinary representatives of this organization and this state back in Washington. And Jay, thank you for your leadership as well, the National Archives and that wonderful organization of presidential libraries across the country are an amazing, unique asset that our country has that the world does not. And I think it's really the envy of the world. And I'm a big fan and believer in that system. And I hope it can continue to grow and strengthen and have the impact that it's always had. So thank you to you and the team on the foundation side and the library side are both so vital to this wonderful chemistry of this partnership. Well, I began my career back in Washington in the 1980s during the Reagan presidency, and at that time thought I might be interested in the political side of working on in presidential administrations and on that aspect of things, but soon learned that my real interest from my studies in school as well as in my heart was the permanence of the infrastructure of where this government operates. If you go into my office in Washington, there's a grainy black and white photograph of my 5th grade class picture in their trip to Washington, and we're sitting on the Capitol lawn, and I have very vivid memories of going to the Capitol and to the White House and Mount Vernon. And at that time, as such a young student, it came to life for me the importance of place and the stage upon which these important works of our government, of our democracy would take place. And so as I would watch the news growing up, I would be able to picture it in more context than just the press secretary at the briefing room podium or the president walking out to the helicopter. I realized there was this infrastructure. And in our case, at the White House, there is this wonderful cadre of 100 people that are there no matter what happens or who the president is, and they are the magic, the secret sauce that keeps that place going. And it's the chefs, butlers, ushers, curators, maids, electricians, plumbers, florists, all of these people. And some of them, it's not unusual to have family members that have worked there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. Really amazing stories of 100 years of family service in the White House. And so it's a privilege to be in this role. I've been now, as Jay said, in my 12th year. I've had my 11th anniversary. And to be there, and our role also is the same regardless of who the president and first lady may be. Now, it may be a little more active under certain presidencies than others, but we are there on behalf of the American people to ensure that the museum standard of the interiors of the White House and the White House collection itself is maintained and cared for and continues to evolve. And new things are constantly added to the collection that represent new artists, new genres. And one of my favorite sayings of our founder, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, is the White House belongs to the American people. And that house and its collection belongs to the American people. Now, presidents may think it belongs to them for 4 years or for 8 years, and some treat it as if that's the case. But the reality is the baton passes, and as we reflect on the 13 presidencies that we've had the privilege to work with since our founding in 1961, the 45 presidents, or 47 presidencies with 45 presidents that have been president, but only all of them except George Washington actually occupied the White House. It's an amazing thing that we have had this peaceful transition power in our country, and now as we're on the cusp of our 250th anniversary, even more so important that we have conversations like this, that we encourage and inspire one another, that we think about the whole arc of American history and of White House history and presidential history, and don't get absorbed in just a specific presidency along the bumpy road that is American history.
Thank you, Stewart. Jackie Kennedy established the White House Historic Association in 1961. I do want to mention a quote in your bio that I find so interesting that Ambassador Caroline Kennedy once said, "I'm sorry my mother didn't get a chance to work with you since you seem to run at her speed." I would agree with that, having worked with you for quite some time. But can you tell me a little bit about why Mrs. Kennedy established the White House Historic Association? I think we know bits and pieces of that from what you just talked about. But what was it like beforehand? Like, how was the art? So talk about why she established it, which I think we kind of know the answer, but then tell us about what it was like before the association was founded in terms of the art and the collection.
Sure. Well, many of you will know and have experienced from being at the White House that it is an extraordinary collection of fine and decorative arts and furnishings. And we can be very proud as Americans that when you go in the White House today, everything you see there, the collection that belongs to the White House, is maintained at the very best level. Sadly, you go into Buckingham Palace or 10 Downing Street or the Élysée Palace or even Windsor Castle, where the state dinner is held tonight. The big room may look grand, but if you look close, the rugs are frayed and the draperies are worn, and it's all dependent on the Parliament to provide the resources to maintain that. When you go on the state floor at the White House, everything you see, rugs, draperies, upholstery, fine arts, decorative arts, is maintained by the White House Historical Association or is acquired, if it's a new acquisition, by non-taxpayer funding on behalf of the American people. And this has all been the case since Jackie Kennedy. Before the Kennedys, a new president could come into the White House and they could get rid of anything they wanted to. They didn't like maybe the French things, or they didn't like they wanted new and fresh things, and there was nobody to take care of these items, so they were worn. They would auction them or sell them or get rid of them, and they wanted new things. So literally, when the Kennedys came into the White House in January of 1961, the White House was largely furnished by New York department store reproduction furniture and some things that had hung on over the years. And she thought it should represent the very best of American artisans and craftsmen. So she did two things. She put together a group of people that were collectors and friends who had the resources and the relationships to try to bring things back to the White House that were once there, or period to the founding era when the White House was, or when the White House was first built in Adams moved in actually in November of 1800. We're on the cusp of that 225th anniversary, that early period of the presidents occupying the White House. And so she did that, but then she also wanted to have assets and resources to add new things, to bring new things that should be represented into the White House collection. She's 31 years old when she becomes First Lady of the United States. 31 years old. And she also had every reason to believe, even at that young age, that she and President Kennedy would be in the White House for 4 years or for 8 years. But due to his tragic assassination, that presidency and her time as First Lady was truncated to just 3 years. But she was a young woman in a hurry.
Yeah.
And everything that she wanted to do, she front-loaded and put into place. So that when she passed that baton to Mrs. Johnson, a system was already in place. There was the first curator in the White House to take care of the art and the objects. There was a group that we now call the Committee for the Preservation of the White House, a group of advisors, people from museums, galleries, historic homes. It's a sounding board to the President and the First Lady. We would like to do this in this room or this in that room, and they give advice on that. The White House Historical Association to be the researcher and the funder of that work to happen. And now, over 13 presidencies, that has benefited every president and First Lady, and the great work that, although I was not there at the time, that the Clintons did, and Mrs. Clinton in particular, during her time as First Lady, that contributed to the legacy of Mrs. Kennedy and kept that going. But it's amazing, if it had not been for Jackie Kennedy, I don't know what the White House would look like today. Obviously, we would not exist. And it was done at a time when it was accepted, when it was viewed as a positive thing. I fear that if it had not happened until later, it would be seen as, oh, you just want to make where you live look nice and fancy for you.
Vanity project.
Vanity project. And whoever the other side was would have criticized it or struck it down. But she put it in place, and it took root. And now we are there, and we do what we do, regardless of who the President and First Lady may be, all thanks to this woman who came into the White House at such a young age. And there's a wonderful handwritten letter that she wrote to Mrs. Johnson on the Sunday before she and the kids left the White House in December of 1963. They stayed in the White House a few weeks to kind of get themselves together and determine where they were going to go. And she writes this letter to Lady Bird Johnson, and she says, paraphrasing, I hope you'll continue the work that I began. Many people in America will probably think, oh, that's Jackie Kennedy's thing. We're tired of hearing Jackie Kennedy talk about that. But it's so important, and I hope you'll continue it. And you'll do your own thing as First Lady, but take care of this house on behalf of the American people. And Mrs. Johnson did that. She embraced that, and that has continued and conveyed to every presidency since.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the collection at the White House. Could you talk about the process of selecting pieces to be displayed at the White House? Give us a little sense of what that process looks like.
Sure. Well, there are a few avenues. There is the Committee for the Preservation of the White House, where if a First Lady would like to do something, she would go to that group traditionally. And I would note that almost everything that we do is based on tradition and custom. I shared earlier, there's no law that says the blue room must be blue. That's custom and tradition. And if somebody comes along that doesn't believe in custom and tradition, then that could change. But this Committee for the Preservation of the White House, for example, Mrs. Obama wanted to include more modern works of art in the White House collection. The rules of the collection are the artist must be deceased and the work of art must be 25 years old or older. So you don't have current artists pounding their chest that my work is in the White House, and other collectors who have their works, their value goes up. So that's the rules of the collection. So Mrs. Obama went to the Committee for the Preservation of the White House. I'm interested in doing this. They identified several works that they thought would be fitting and appropriate, then came to us and sought our help to acquire those, either by donation or by us paying for them. So we had to see who were the artists, what was available. You can't buy something if it's not for sale, mostly. And so we then acquired, with the White House, a Rauschenberg, two Albers, the Alma Thomas, the first African-American female artist. The first African-American artist was the Tanner painting of the sand dunes at sunset in Atlantic City that was acquired during the Clinton presidency, but the first African-American female artist was Alma Thomas during the Obama presidency. So all those were identified, all those were brought together, and there were some, including on our own board, who thought, these modern works are going to clash with this federal feel of the White House. So to begin with, Mrs. Obama put them all in the old family dining room, which is adjacent to the state dining room, and made essentially a gallery, a place in there that was special for them. Then over the Trump presidency and the Biden presidency, they were moved out and around and actually integrated, and surprisingly, they did really well, and they've really changed the feel in some measure to the collection. So that's one way that things can be added. Another way is someone may have had something, and their great-great-grandmother had something, and we've always heard this was in the White House, and we'll be approached, and we'd like to give it back to the White House. We have that assessed or evaluated to determine if, in fact, that's true, and we would like to have it, and then we may acquire it that way. The White House itself does not have gift receipt authority, so you can't just go give something to the White House. It comes through us, in which you would want it to do anyway if you'd like to have a tax deduction for that. But that way we can assess and measure the appropriateness and work with the curators to determine if that's something that, in fact, that they want. And it can be done by our purchase or by gifting through us. Those are the primary ways. Now, there are things like the presidential and first lady portraits, the china for the White House. We directly go out and contract with those artists, or go out in a contract for that china to be designed with the First Lady's design, and buy those on behalf of the White House and the President.
I really appreciate you bringing up the contributions of the Clintons. Both have always been big supporters of arts and humanities and history. President Clinton was famous for his White House tours he would give to guests at midnight, taking them up and telling them little stories about every little nook and cranny in the White House, and knew so much. It was just fascinating to be on a tour with him. And I really appreciate you mentioning Secretary Clinton's contribution, because a lot of people don't know what a deep interest that she had and how closely she worked with the association and the committee. To me, some of the most memorable contributions were, as you mentioned, the acquisition of the Henry Ossawa Tanner painting, which was the first painting by an African-American artist to be displayed in the White House. Obviously, they thought that was extremely important. And at that point, there was not art by any female artists displayed in the White House. So they acquired a Georgia O'Keeffe painting that, is it still in the library above the fireplace?
The Georgia O'Keeffe painting is above the mantle
it's still there.
in the library, on the ground floor. And the Tanner piece is in the green room still today.
That's great. And then the other memorable occasion was in the first term, Secretary Clinton noticed that there was no craft displayed in the White House. That form of art was not elevated to, so she commissioned, in partnership with the association, artists from all 50 states to create a beautiful piece of craft, which obviously could be wood or glass or metal, and that became, it was first displayed at the White House, and then it traveled to museums across the country. And then, I can't remember, Jay, exactly, a few years ago, we displayed the collection in its entirety. Here, we've had little pieces out here and there, but we brought out the entire collection, brought back many of the artists, and it was just really well received. And it's a really astounding collection. It's really quite beautiful.
It is, and she also brought in the sculptures into the First Lady's garden, which was a unique dimension. There's the famous Rose Garden that has been on the west side by the Oval Office, but then on the east side there was a reflection garden that was the First Lady's garden until the Johnson presidency, when Mrs. Johnson renamed it after Mrs. Kennedy, and we now call it the Jackie Kennedy Garden, or have called it the Jackie Kennedy Garden. Then Mrs. Clinton brought sculpture that was on loan to the collection for the purpose of being displayed in that garden, which was so iconic. When you walked through on a White House tour, you would come along the colonnade and look out the windows along the First Lady's garden and see that beautiful sculpture there that was really nice.
It was really special.
And I do want to give one more big shout out to Mrs. Clinton as First Lady. She and then, actually Barbara Bush before her, and then Hillary Clinton were the two First Ladies who rolled up their sleeves, contacted their friends, and created what we now have as an endowment for acquisitions for the White House. That is an amazing thing for us not to have to go out and fundraise for.
Right.
When something comes to auction or something is available, we can just act immediately. And that's a huge blessing, and in large credit to both Mrs. Clinton and Barbara Bush for that.
And then, obviously, the 200th anniversary of the White House was quite special. At the end of the Clinton administration, the Millennium celebrations, and there's a White House photo downstairs right outside our restaurant 42 of all the living presidents and first ladies who came back for that. Mrs. Johnson was still alive then, and then Secretary Clinton used that occasion as well to work with you all to create a new set of china, which we have on display here. I love the china. I love the Reagan china. It's actually my favorite.
So when you see that painting or that photograph that you talk about of the living presidents and first ladies, and then you realize that it was taken in November of 2000, the week after the presidential election. So you have the Clintons there and the Bushes there and all of the tension that was in the air regarding the 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. And yet, President and Mrs. Clinton convened and hosted this group of presidents and first ladies that brought the country together as it should be. And there was no delineation of party or politics.
Exactly.
That was out of the equation. And that was a really iconic moment. And the china that is still one of the most frequently used today is what we call the Clinton china, but was the bicentennial china that is that you have replicas of here today. You have actually an actual set of it here. And then we have honored that china as one of two sets on our White House Christmas ornament this year. On one side is the Reagan red china, and the other side is the Clinton gold china. This is the 125th anniversary, 150th anniversary, so many anniversaries. This, the 150th anniversaries of state dinners at the White House, since the first one was held by President Ulysses S. Grant. And so this year's ornament celebrates the custom, tradition, importance of cultural diplomacy, social diplomacy, and White House state dinners by featuring the Reagan and the Clinton state services.
The holiday ornament, we have continued that tradition here at the Clinton Center. As many of you know, every year the White House Historic Association creates a new ornament for the holidays, which is on sale through the White House Historic Association and at the Decatur House. Stewart was gracious enough to send me one of this year's, and I have to say, it is, I think, truly one of the most remarkable, beautiful ornaments. I would highly recommend you all get on. Tell us how they get on your website. It is extraordinary.
Well, here's my opportunity.
I should have brought it so I could show it.
You should be selling them in your shop here.
I should. Let's do that. Looking for.
We'd be happy to make that happen. But you can go to our website, whitehousehistory.org. You can also, if you happen to be in Washington, come by our shop and get them there. But it is a beautiful ornament that represents that anniversary. And then in 2026, our ornament will, of course, commemorate America's 250th. And we're honored to be in partnership with the American 250 Commission and have their logo on the ornament, and it'll be disseminated nationally in commemoration of that great occasion.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We're all working closely with we're working with you, and we're working with the commission to present some really unique programs and exhibits during that period. Can you talk a little bit about what the association is doing, if you can? Give us a little taste of some of the things you're planning for the
Sure.
50th.
Well, There's this national commission that has been put together, appointed by Congress, and then the White House has its own contribution to that important work. And that will oversee this national emphasis. But what I think is the strength of this commemoration is when I travel and I see what's being planned in communities and states and organizations like here at the Clinton Library, and I know what we're doing, I think it's going to take all of us working together, everybody doing something in their space, in their place of influence, to really turn the needle with civics education and civics engagement and involvement, and using this moment in time, recognizing the Declaration of Independence and the initiation of our country, and to get the attention of not just young people, but of adults as well that take so much of this for granted. And we are, in our space, doing a few things. We've partnered with two British entities. One is the Royal Collection Trust, which is our counterpart at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle with the collection that is His Majesty's, I want to say Her Majesty's, but now His Majesty's collection, an amazing treasure trove of works. And we're focusing on the American artists in the British collection. And on our side, we're focusing on the British-born artists in the White House collection. And I learned from my counterpart over there, Tim Knox, that King George, his three favorite artists were American artists.
Really?
Counterintuitive. So we're going to have a lot of fun in talking about those two collections. We're going to have an episode in London and an episode in Washington to bring together people to talk about those as well as a social media plan. We also have a program we're working on with Westminster Abbey, and that will be our annual symposium in May, where we will focus on faith and the fundamentals in the formation of democracy, and how we would have been British subjects, and it would have been the Church of England, and how the church then changed in America, early America, and the dynamics of Washington, and we could spend a whole program on Lafayette Park, which is right in front of the White House, but it was actually the building ground, the building zone of the White House. And of course, there were enslaved workers, free workers, skilled workers from Europe, but it's in that park that the Catholic workers from Ireland worshiped, and they then formed St. Patrick's Church, St. Patrick's Catholic Church, the first church in Washington, D.C. The Presbyterian stonemasons from Scotland started worshiping in that carpenter shed as well. New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, which was the Church of Abraham Lincoln, National Presbyterian Church, which was the Church of Dwight Eisenhower, they both trace their roots back to that carpenter shed in that park as well.
Wow.
So there's so much history that evolves from that. So that'll be on May 1st. Then that evening we'll culminate that symposium with a concert by the Westminster Abbey Choir, which is coming over. So that will be very special. We're doing our ornament for 2026, themed on the America's 250. All of our regular programming throughout the year, our Teacher Institute and all of the programming will have a flavor of that, of America 250. And then the last thing, as we all move past the parades and fireworks and barbecues and essay contests next summer, and we're in the fall of 2026, we're going to convene our Presidential Sites Summit, which we do every 2 years, where we bring together sites from all over the country. And believe it or not, Stephanie knows there are about 200 presidential sites.
Right. We actually hosted it here in
Yes,
2014.
early on. Yes, so birthplaces, childhood homes, alma maters, libraries, museums. So now we have taken that program over, and every 2 years we convene that group. It'll be in September of 2026, and the theme will be, okay, where do we go from here? We've had these celebrations, we've had these picnics, we've seen the fireworks, we've done the essays. Now what do we do? Where do we take this great momentum and movement from the America's 250th into the future? So that's a flavor of what we're undertaking in our celebration.
I noticed today in the New York Times, I'm glad you mentioned essays, because we are partnering with many of the presidential libraries, and John Bridgeland and Dr. Colleen Shogan is leading an effort called In Pursuit, which is really incredible. All the living former presidents and first ladies are writing essays. The Clintons are going to be writing essays on other former presidents. So it was announced today that President Clinton will be writing an essay on President Theodore Roosevelt. Secretary Clinton will be writing an essay on Eleanor Roosevelt, correct? And then Mrs. Obama is writing, President Obama. I think President Bush is writing the one on George Washington. Is that, wait, I may have that wrong. Yes? Oh, look at me. Wow, I read the article. So that to me is exciting because, again, I think right now it's so important for us to be able to show.
Yeah, I think George Bush calls George Washington the other George
W. The other
W.
George, yeah.
The other
George W. The other W. But again, I think people love seeing former presidents, that special club of people who have held that very demanding role, but that are still very much connected. They rely on each other for counsel. And one of the outputs of that from President Clinton and President George W. Bush, many of you know, 10 years ago, they decided to create a program, a nonpartisan leadership program that really does focus on civic engagements and how we bring people together, how to have difficult conversations. And so we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of that program. We start out in Washington, D.C. for about 5 days. And one of the highlights of the initial module, where we bring these 60 individuals together that are so diverse from all walks of life, pretty high-level mid-career professionals. We have an event with the White House Historic Association at the Decatur House, which is your space that you just referred to, where the fabulous gift shop is. But one, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but I think it was in 2017. During that event, the presidential scholars always get a wonderful tour of the Decatur House, and they were going along the tour, and I believe one of them asked, was there an exhibit or something in the space marking the contributions of the enslaved Americans who built that? And there wasn't a robust exhibit, and I find it so amazing that you and your staff embraced that, worked with the scholars, raised the money, and now it's just such a beautiful, phenomenal exhibit celebrating and recognizing the individuals that built the White House. Do you want to talk at all about that?
Sure, and this was the cohort, I think you are right, in 2017. And this had been bubbling.
Right.
Since the year before. Many of you will remember First Lady Michelle Obama,
yes,
in the spring of 2016 gave a commencement address, and then later at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, she said, "I wake up every morning in a home that was built by slaves." Well, we knew that, but we did not know the degree and the extent and the details of that. Well, by the next day, our phone was ringing off the hook, people wanting to know the story behind the story. What is there to know? So our historians set out on what has now been a 9-year and continuing research project on the history of the enslaved workers who built the White House. And sadly, tragically, 11 of our first 12 presidents either owned slaves or allowed them to work in the president's house while they were living there. So they had this affiliation and connectivity with them, even though they may not have owned them. The story that Stephanie relates to was quite a moving evening, where it was in Decatur House, which has the last existing example of how enslaved people lived in the president's neighborhood, right there within a stone's throw of the White House itself. And so we had this building, this leg of the behind the Decatur House, that we were really struggling how to interpret and what to do with this. And you're exactly right. That group inspired and then contributed to the telling of that story. And so if you come today to Decatur House, you will see a very well-told story of how they lived and worked as part of that home, and then part of the greater DC, what is now DC, community. But our story and our research about the 200 people that we've identified who were enslaved, who worked in what is now Lafayette Park to build the president's house. The irony, the tragic irony of the greatest symbol of freedom and democracy in the world was built in large measure by the hands of enslaved people. So we tell that story in great depth on our website. My dream has been that through research we would be able to find descendants way down the line from those enslaved workers, to maybe go to a young woman in St. Louis and say your great-great-great-great-grandfather helped build the White House. The records are such, despite with professional help, that they were owned by slave owners who owned farms or estates, or they would go to those records and it would say Joe of Smith Farm. Well, there may have been 5 Joes at Smith Farm, and there would be no name other than Smith. So it breaks down pretty quickly. But the ones who did work for the presidents in the White House, we do have their records, and we do know those details, and we have been able to find descendants of those, and that has been very rewarding work. The last thing I'll tell you on that story is we have worked with the National Park Service, and on the north side of Lafayette Park, we have put down these waysides, and one of them tells the story of those enslaved workers. And so you read it, and you look across the park. Now, thousands of people walk across this park every day, and they have no awareness that beneath their feet is where 200 men sweat, bled, probably even died working to build that house. And so we tell their story not only in printed narrative, but there's a button, and you can listen to the voices of a young black woman and a young black man tell the story of those 200 enslaved workers. And that's Hillary and Royce, and I called Hillary and Royce the voice of the voiceless. Those 200 workers could never have dreamed that one day somebody would their voice would be heard telling tourists from all over the world what they had done on that piece of land. So that's the privilege that our historians have had. And your presidential leadership scholars initiated a really important piece of that story. And that program is so significant and has done such great work. And the people who have come through that are doing an incredible, they had to be incredible to get in it.
Right.
But they come out of it and do even more amazing things. So thanks to you, this library, foundation, both Bushes and Johnson, a collaboration that's not only bipartisan and nonpartisan, but is really enriching and making America greater.
I really appreciate you saying that. It is. It's a powerful program, and you think about, at this point, we have almost 600 individuals who have gone through this 6-month program, and part of the reason President Clinton and President Bush came up with this notion is because once you graduate from the 6 months, this cohort of alumni that continue to engage with each other. We're about to have a reunion in D.C., but the way they continue to connect, they connect across cohorts and are working, as you said, to solve some of our world's greatest challenges across the aisle in a bipartisan way. And what a model I think that we all need to focus on now more than ever. So I appreciate you recognizing that. We talked a little bit about then First Lady Hillary Clinton's contributions to the White House Historic Association, Jackie Kennedy. You mentioned Michelle Obama. Can you tell us about your work with other First Ladies and any project you're especially fond of?
Well, there are kind of 2 flavors of that. Some First Ladies like to do something that will be seen and there will be some ooh and ah to it, and that will represent for legacy value what they did and left in the White House. Other First Ladies, and I'll use the example of Mrs. Trump in the first presidency, I think her European background gives her a deeper appreciation for history in general than most Americans have, because their arc of history is much longer than ours. And so she was really interested in historic preservation of the house itself. State floor, residence floor, there are 32 very thick historic wooden doors. And because so many of the presidents before them had had pets, there were claw marks and scratches, and these doors were really kind of unsightly.
They didn't have any pets.
So they didn't have any pets.
Sad.
So, but these were so marred, the doors were so marred, they undertook what became a months-long process to take each door off, take it off property for 2 weeks, refinish it, bring it back on, and rehang it. So that was an imposition to the family, but the result was it was as it should be. So there are the preservation types of projects, and there are the enhancement and the additional types of projects. Another one that comes to mind is Laura Bush, a librarian by training and interest, and wanted to do something in the White House Library to make a difference in that space. So she worked with the Committee of the Preservation of the White House, worked with us, and we redid that space. She also redid the Lincoln bedroom at the time to take it back to what it had been when it first became a bedroom after the Lincoln presidency. So there have been an array. Dr. Biden, interestingly, was not as interested in the aesthetic things and the collection things, but because she is a teacher and an educator by vocation and interest, she worked really closely with us on our education programs and was really wind in the sails of this People's House project.
I was going to ask you about that.
She was extremely helpful to us to bring people, when we would bring people to Washington to help get them inspired about the project and supporting the project, she would speak to them about how important the education mission is that we undertake and what a difference they could make in that regard. So that was her superpower with us, is making that work happen.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Jay alluded to the fact that he and I both had the great privilege of viewing the People's House exhibition a few days before it opened. And it's interesting that the exhibit designer for that project, Ralph Applebaum Associates, they were the exhibit designers when we first opened the exhibits here in 2004 and are working with us again on our refurbishment and expansion of the Clinton Center. So a really terrific firm. Talk about that.
He's
project.
probably out of therapy now from having to work with me.
Well, they're back working with us, so
they are fantastic.
They
are
are
really the best in the country, I think,
Yeah.
and did a wonderful job with us. And ours is so technology driven
It's
and unique.
fantastic.
It's not a lot of objects behind glass or things that you have to see and experience. It's all where you become a part of. Like you walk into a room the size of maybe 2/3 the size of this, and it literally becomes a room of the White House around you on all four walls and the floor. You sit at a cabinet table with 3 different presidents, and you're interactive literally with President Lincoln, President Roosevelt, President Kennedy on 3 different scenarios from American history, and the president asks you what you think we should do on this scenario, and you get to respond. So it's amazing, and you can imagine.
Walk into a state dinner. That was one of
Yes,
my
you
favorites.
get to
It's
become a part of a
incredible.
state dinner. You're seated at the table, and across from you are others telling you what it's like to attend a state dinner and why it's important. So you can imagine how that would not only captivate the mind of a 10-year-old, but an 80-year-old. So the range of attention that we're able to capture and engage has been really, really important. So I'm excited to see what they do with you here.
Well, I have to say, seeing that exhibit, Ralph really wanted us to see it because as we were talking about updating the technology here and the types of experiences that you offer visitors that come there, that we could do that here, that really sort of opened our mind to the kinds of opportunities that we're working on creating as part of this expansion.
And another great thing about what we do is we're not in competition.
Oh, no.
This is collaboration. It's going to take
Absolutely.
all of us linking together to have the impact that is important for us to have. So I cheer you on, give you the kudos to make it the very best that's ever been. And I love working with our presidential libraries and centers across the country.
We really do not compete. We support each other because if someone goes and visits the Gerald Ford Library, they are going to see something there and, wow, well, when I go to Arkansas, I want to visit the Clinton Library, or I'm going to go to College Station, I want to go see the George Bush Library. So we have like this passport that people can go visit all of the libraries and collect their passport stamp. And I really feel that the presidential libraries are some of America's best history museums. When you think about that little snapshot in time that they're focusing on, it's not just on the president and the first family, it's about what was happening in our country and in the world. And so it really is a unique venue to learn things that you're not going to see when you go to some of our other wonderful national museums.
That's right. And kudos to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had this idea to create this system and then went back and brought in Herbert Hoover into it. So since from Herbert Hoover to Donald Trump, now we have this system unique in the world. There's not another system of government in the world that collects, captures, and makes available for not just people to come in and see, but the scholarly research
Absolutely.
that takes place at these places with authors, students, journalists, film producers, just amazing resources of American history that are made available through places like this.
That's why that is a major reason that I'm so supportive of this model, that we have the partnership between the foundations and the libraries to run these, because having those items on site, having the documents for scholars to come here to do the research and then go to other places in Arkansas to learn about President Clinton's history, going to Hope, going to Hot Springs, you really get a unique flavor of the individual who held that office by coming to their presidential library versus just, accessing things online. So we at the Clinton Presidential Center find real deep value in the partnership with the folks at the library. So I would like you to tell us, a little, we've talked about the White House collection. I'm sure you have some favorite portraits or items that are in the current White House collection. I know picking just one or two is really hard, but I'm going to ask you to pick.
Like, who's your favorite child?
Exactly.
Which is your favorite dog, or what is
What
this?
is one of your favorite portraits in the current White House collection?
Well, you want me to say the Clinton?
No,
portraits?
not the portrait. No, I'm sorry. Aside from the presidential portraits, I'm talking about the other artwork.
Oh, wow.
That's what I meant.
Well,
yes.
let me say about the portraits. They are very different. We started funding the portraits during the Johnson presidency. We had just been founded, and so the Johnson portraits were the first that we supported. Then a little bit later, the Schickler portraits of President and Mrs. Kennedy were unveiled during the Nixon presidency. It was the first time Mrs. Kennedy had been back to the White House. She came with John and Caroline. The Nixons invited them to see the portraits, and then they went upstairs and had dinner with President and Mrs. Nixon, a wonderful moment
Absolutely.
of presidential family dynamic. So those portraits of the Kennedys are pretty special. Interestingly, the portraits of President and Mrs. Reagan were also painted by Schickler. And that's an interesting to look at those juxtaposed
That
to one
beautiful
another.
red dress, Nancy Reagan in her red.
Yeah,
I'm a
very
big
right.
red person as well.
I have to mention the Gilbert Stewart of George Washington that's now in the East Room. The only thing in the White House today that was in the White House on November the 1st of 1800 when John and Abigail Adams moved in. Of course, the famous story of Mrs. Abigail Adams and enslaved staff working to save the portrait when the British lit the White House on fire. But it's that portrait, it's the Healy portrait of Lincoln above the mantel in the state dining room. Probably my favorite is the John Singer Sargent portrait of Teddy Roosevelt. There's a great story with that. Roosevelt, you can just see him marching around, and the sergeant's following him, trying to find a place to take it. And President Roosevelt there's this great story. President Roosevelt says, "You're following me everywhere. You just can't find the place to do this portrait. You just keep following me everywhere I go." And Sargent says, "Well, Mr. President, you don't know what a pose is." And he spun around, and they were on the staircase going upstairs, and he put his hand down on the banister, and he said, "Yes, I do." And Sargent said, "Hold it, that's it right there."
I love it.
And he's holding onto the ball of the banister, and it's this great picture of strength and defiance. And that's the John Singer Sargent portrait of Teddy Roosevelt. But there are other amazing works of art throughout that are, I would mention two others in the portrait. Edith Roosevelt, her portrait in the green room the green room is extraordinary. And then the portrait of Grace Coolidge.
Grace Coolidge, I was hoping with the
Grace
dog
Coolidge,
in the China room.
It's a very slender portrait on the South Lawn, and it just looks like it's out of the Gilded Age television series. It just really magnificent. And the rest of the art is very special, and it changes. One of the things that we have done in recent years is try to add firsts. So you mentioned the first African-American artist, the Tanner, the first female African-American artist, the Alma Thomas, which I do love. With Mrs. Trump in the first term, we added the first Asian-American artist, the Osamu Noguchi, Japanese-American sculptor who was actually interned in a prison camp and became a sculpture artist, and that sculpture is currently being conserved, but will come back out and be shared sometime soon. There are a number of sculptures in the White House collection that are principally busts of presidents, and that brings to mind a story that I think is important to tell about, that I won't be able to tell in 17
No, you will.
seconds.
That's just a guide. That's not.
But
real.
it's a theory that I have about portraiture of our presidents and first ladies then versus now. In the early period of White House history, the portrait artist would actually come and be in residence. They would stay in the White House for a period of time. And like Sargent trying to capture Teddy Roosevelt, following him around, they followed him around, or they would get them to stop, and they would try to capture them in a moment in time, whether they're painting or sculpturing. There's a great picture of Harry Truman in the cabinet room getting a sculpture to chisel him in his bust. But my theory is, in the early period of American history and White House history, Americans depended on works of art and depictions of their presidents to know what they looked like.
Sure.
Now we know way too much what they look like. We see
Absolutely.
them all the time, every day. And so early on, the artists were needed to share with the American people what their president looked like. Now, when I work with the president and first lady to select a portrait artist, I sense and feel and hear from them that it's what they want to be seen as. It's how they want to be seen and remembered. There are jillions of photographs of what they actually look like. We don't need that. But the portrait, they want the setting, they want the look, they want the clothes to be how they want to be remembered. So that's an interesting study when you look at portraits really contemporary since Reagan forward. You see that if you look at them with that light, and you see that they want themselves painted and depicted in a way that they want to be remembered.
Well, what a special gift for our visitors to have on loan from you all the official portraits of President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, both, as you mentioned, painted by Simi Knox, who was the first African American to paint a presidential portrait. I think they're astounding. I think my favorites, I love Laura Bush's portrait, and I love Mrs. Reagan's portrait. I think they're both just such wonderful, beautiful characterizations of both of them.
There are, and I'll tell you, it's interesting. President Reagan and Barbara Bush have something in common when it comes to their portraits.
What?
They didn't like them. So they had to be redone by another artist. So both of their portraits
So what
were
happened to the
redone.
ones they didn't like?
They're still in the White House collection. Yeah.
In a basement somewhere, or in a closet, or are they on display, or what happened?
Well, interestingly enough, you may have noticed that President Trump took the portrait of President Reagan out of the Cross Hall and put it in the Oval Office.
I did notice that,
And
with some other interesting items.
With
in
some
his
other
Oval
interesting
Office.
items. And then he brought the portrait that was done initially of President Reagan and put it where the former one held. Now, the Reagans would not be happy with that, but it's in the White House collection, and he's the president, and he can hang it there. The Barbara Bush one, I don't think I think she probably took it through the Potomac somewhere, but it was it's still in the White House collection as well.
I'd like to pivot briefly, and I promise I'm going to wrap this up, to our temporary exhibit we have right now, which I think is just extraordinary.
I loved it. I went through this afternoon. If you haven't seen it yet, you must see it. And we joked about how these presidential libraries have in the vaults all of these things that people have sent in, from the toilet seat covers with the crocheted pictures of presidents.
Or Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
We had one with that
But
on it.
this is amazing. Just you see how different Americans viewed these two people, and they are fantastic images and stories that they tell.
Any particular ones that you were especially fond of, or you thought were memorable?
Well, they're ones by known and great artists, but I love the ones that were done by the American people, that were the more very well done, but really from the heart, not from the professional talent. And to me, those are the ones that spoke to me.
I really love it. I don't know if President Clinton is a big fan, but the Herb Block caricature of him, it's very colorful. That was just given to us about 3 years ago, Jay, is that right? But I think it's just really fun and very sort of adventurous, and sort of captures his spirit, and I think it's really special. Well, before we close, I wanted to ask you one final question. We usually ask all of our guest speakers to think about any sort of piece of advice. You have had an interesting career, and the way you ended up at the White House Historic Association, I guess you are not like a traditional historian or someone who's worked in curatorial preservation per se. What would you suggest for anyone in our audience, any students, or anyone, frankly, who would like to get involved in sort of history, historic preservation, either, I guess you could do it as a docent, a volunteer. What are some ways that you would suggest people who want to pursue a career, maybe? Let's think about it from that
Sure. Well, I began my visit here today with the wonderful experience of visiting with 4 interns just right over there, and hearing their stories and what their dreams are, and trying to go back in my life and remember, okay, when I was their age, they're so far ahead of me in my thinking and what their dreams are. And that is inspirational to me, to see young people like that and to have the opportunity to give them a bit of advice and some thoughts and ideas. And to that younger group of people, I would say this: get an internship, get a mentor in the field, volunteer in addition to your internship. Say your internship's in Washington, you come back here, find a place to volunteer here, and then study, find a curriculum, find an academic program somewhere that is in that field that you can really learn from the best in that field that you have access to. For the younger people, that's what I would say. For others of us, there are so many incredible resources now online that you can find and that you can explore and that you can travel and see. We've talked about the presidential libraries. When you go on a vacation and you're driving someplace, look online and see. You'll be shocked at the presidential birthplaces, childhood homes.
Right, that are outside
that are
the NAR
out
system.
there places. Right. And just to stop into those, talk to the volunteers that run those.
Absolutely.
We have our Presidential Site Summit every 2 years, as I mentioned. One of them, you're not going to like this because I talk about the NARA sites as the big wealthy library sites. But Jay's going, oh yeah, right.
Right.
But the little mom and pop volunteer-led sites, I never will forget, one of the summits, this guy comes up to me the second day, and he says, I'm so sorry, I've got to go back home. He was from the James K. Polk birthplace. He said, I'm so sorry, I have to go back home. Our other volunteer has an illness in the family. It was 2 of them.
Oh my goodness.
And he had come to Washington to be a part of this summit, and he was going back so the other one volunteer could run it. But that to me is like, this great thing about this summit is they all come together, and the 2-person James K. Polk site and the 75 staff Reagan site or whatever it is, they're all the same group of people inspired to do the same work. And they all need volunteers. They all need docents. They all need supporters. That's another way that you can become involved, is whether it's $5 or $10 or $1,000 or an estate gift.
Or $50 million.
Keep this, yes, or $50 million. Yes. It's invest in that. We think of investments as something that you get a financial dividend from on a statement or from your broker. But investing in a place like this with your financial resources, but also with your time and your support, and just bringing people to these places when you have people to visit, it is so important and so appreciated. And so as I look at people in this room, and I don't know your stories, and I don't know, some of you you're here every week, and some of you may have been here, this is the first or second time. Everybody's important to the fabric of this tapestry that tells this story of President and Mrs. Clinton. And like Stephanie said so well, these are not just resources that tell the story of a president and first lady, but of a period of time in our American history that you can come into this place and understand what America was like in that time, what we were like as a country. And just walking through the galleries today, I'm saturated in this stuff, but walking through the galleries, Ann took me on a wonderful tour today, and it just peeled off the dusty layers of memory of me. And I'm reflecting back of, oh yeah, that was that. We achieved that. That was accomplished. And it is so inspirational even for me to come to a place like this today.
Well, we are thrilled that you came back you will be coming back.
I would love to come back.
You will be coming back, and thank you so much for recognizing the contributions of our volunteers. I think we have several in the room, and I'm going to ask them to stand up and be recognized because they do provide such an incredible service here. I'm going to stand up. I know you guys are here. Look how many volunteers. This is incredible. And Patrick, one of our volunteers, who was our Volunteer of the Year 2 years ago, also was a presidential scholar as well. So, yes, President Clinton comes back here every year and gives the award to the Volunteer of the Year who they elect among themselves. And we just are so grateful for all of you. And we're so grateful that all of you came tonight to this program. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I know that I'm in trouble because I've gone way over the time limit, but this was so interesting. So, Stewart, we're going to have you come back again.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd love to. Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.